Hi everyone, my name is Beata Wilczek and this is Fashion Knowledge, a podcast educating, disrupting and shaping fashion futures. Fashion Knowledge is brought to you by Unfolding Strategies, a consultancy and education lab for digital, inclusive and sustainable fashion in Web3. Hi, welcome. Today we have an amazing guest. Her name is Marie Genevieve Cyr. She's a fashion designer, artist, and educator. Marie is a director of the BFA Fashion Design program and an associate professor of fashion design at Parsons School of Design in New York. She has an MA in visual culture and fashion theory from New York University and BA in design of applied arts from Edinburgh College of Arts. Her research lies on the discourse of material and visual culture, looking at advertisement, rethinking design methodologies, and global identity. Her most recent research examines hyperreality, hyperconsumption, Asian pop culture, and the internet. In her work, she often examines post-internet artistic strategies and how they can impact the fashion design practices. And I hope this is something we're going to dive a little bit deeper into today. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm super excited to be here.
Yeah, pleasure to have you here. So as we start, maybe we can start thinking, how in your practice fashion and the internet overlap? What is the relationship and why is it even interesting to look at them together?
Yeah. I mean, I think I started really looking at, I think my entire work started with looking at hyperconsumption as well. Like in 2016, I started to spend a lot of time in China in general as well. And I was really interested with the relationship between advertisement and landscape as well, and how fashion was presented as well, not necessarily produced, but presented as well. And it was really, really interesting to me, this relationship between how do they actually advertise fashion. And then, of course, hyperconsumption, this idea that clothing or fashion is kind of everywhere as well. And it's so present in every single thing in our life. And I think that's when it kind of started as well. Like for me, this idea of hyperconsumption before I even looked at the internet, that kind of where it happened. But then the reason why I started to look at the internet is at some point I was in Toronto, I think it was in 2016 as well, or even like 14. And I saw an exhibition of Douglas Copeland as well, and I started to read the book, The Age of Earthquakes. And it was just really interesting when I started to really think about, how we're using language as well, just in general, to really kind of like talk about this hyperconsumption and the world we live in as well. And I think that's after reading this book, I remember on the flight back to New York, that I was really interested in maybe looking more about the impact of the internet in the language. So that's kind of how it started as well. Like I was really interested how the internet impacted the way we were thinking about language, and words. I think that's where it started for me to look at the internet, So it was not really about how do we sell clothes and how do we produce clothes and how do we market clothes. I was not interested in that, I was really interested in like the impact on how we actually talk about fashion and design.
So before we jump into talking more about words, because I have some cool quotes from your garments, and I will share them in a second, I would like to maybe understand a bit more. What do you mean when you say post-internet artistic strategies? What are they? Because you are thinking how to apply them to fashion design. This is what you work with. So what are those post-internet artistic strategies?
Yeah, so I think some years ago, I started to look at what was happening in the art world, because I think for me, it's always very important to look at what's happening in the art world, because, the artists are really manifesting like new ideas that are happening in society as well. So for me, I started to look at this and I really started to really look at a lot of internet artists, obviously looking at the history of internet art, all the way from the 90s and like how it's been impacting as well, how artists are thinking about art, are developing art, are making art as well. And I was really interested between this relationship between the online and offline. And I think that's what relates to the post-internet as well. Usually it's kind of like these like strategies looking and critiquing practices that exist online or ideas that are being developed because of the internet, but in a physical manifestation. And especially since fashion often is like a physical manifestation that we wear on our bodies, I was really interested in looking a little bit more about this like post-internet art practice that kind of started around like 2000, 10, or so on as well. And just like this new generation of artists that was really interested, this idea of, going to exhibition and experiencing something physically, but then that relates to the online experience. So that's kind of how it started, and that's what it means, this idea of post-internet. It's not like internet art that existed online, that was like art that was often made for the online, ideas online, but that kept like the digital aspect as well. So I think that's the difference with the post-internet, to think about, no, it's actually something that is physical. So that's kind of how I started to really look at this as well. And I was really interested in how this idea of the post-internet like art practice could impact our fashion design students, like really thinking about how that's impacting research and design processes, that is really where my interested in.
Yeah, I think this is something that really intrigued me about your work, and I can clearly see that because in around 2012, 2014, I was very personally involved with post-internet art. I did shows with like some artists like Katia Nowitzkova as a curator. I even wrote my, first master thesis, second master thesis on like post-internet bodies, whereas embody all of that. But it's something that I always lack that I see in your work is like this relationship to fashion. There's a lot of post-internet art that was, or post-digital art. People like to, differentiate that, but let's say it's same in terms of our conversation. Like there was very little that was about fashion. There was a lot about textiles and using textiles by means, of producing this physical work within the space, as you just described. So this is what I really like. And one of your projects that I first came across was your kaftans. And your kaftans, for those who need to now imagine them because they don't know how your work looks like, they're very minimal when it comes to pattern cutting. It's like you would take a square or rectangle and just make hole for your head and hole for your hands, and then you can wear it and it becomes a kaftan. But what is very particular about them, it's the prints that are very rich and intense. So strong colors, playful typography, and apart from their aesthetics, they have a very, very powerful lyrical value. And some say this is hot, other tune and noun. My personal favorite reads, dark web grunt, new extravaganza, total fucking darkness. Data makes sense to noble Madame design. May the stoop sail be with you. So it's almost like you're making like some verbal dupes using today's language, like a digital language collages. So why is language so important to you in your work?
Oh, God, yes. Thank you for talking about, the kaftans. I call them kaftans, but they're like, they're tunique or, there's something like you mentioned, they're really basic rectangles as well. And I think for me, that was really important actually the idea behind that came from advertisement, almost like this idea of a panel being an advertise. Like that's how it really started as well. So it was not really about a kaftan or a tunique and the historical references behind that necessarily. It was more looking at advertisement as our garments obviously are used as advertisement in our online world right now, and of course like a zero waste cutting, and it's very genderless or gender free if you wish as well. So for me, like that was like really important to have some kind of shape as well that was very minimal. But the language, because again, fashion has become this like image object, or like you mentioned, like the neo-materialism as well, that is important. So, and this idea that fashion can be performative or like be a form of advertisement online, that was really an idea that I was playing with. But the language, I think it's related to my hyperconsumption kind of research, where I, throughout the year, like gather a lot of like quotes or took photos of text as well when I was traveling. And in 2019, I actually had a sabbatical at work to do more research, and I had time as well for a month to just sit down and just like gather all of this and put this together. And some of it, like it's from conversations, it's not, sometimes it's from online, sometimes it's screenshots, sometimes it's photographs of advertisement that I've seen. So it's kind of between this hyperconsumption and also the internet. That's kind of coming from both angles. But yeah, and sometimes it's conversation as well, and it was really interesting. And for me, like the fact that it doesn't have to be only one language. That was something interesting to me because I'm Canadian and I grew up in a small town that only speaks French as well all my life. But this idea for us is very present as well. Where I'm from, this part of Quebec, the Gaspé Coast, or even New Brunswick, everybody speaks both language. And we call it chiac, where they mix French and English, and it's all messy. And I think to me that relates to the internet, this kind of mishmash of things or language, like between this visual and the words coming together. And I think that's where it was really interesting to me, this idea that why I'm someone, my first language is French, why am I only writing, or expressing myself in English? So for me, I wanted to think about it as well. The fact that sometimes I can use internet language, sometimes English, sometimes French, sometimes other as well. Like there's some Chinese like quotes in there as well, that is all related to my experience and the different languages that I'm familiar with. So I thought it was kind of interesting. But yeah, so you see that the Kaftan, sometimes they have different stories depending on different tribals that I've been doing as well, throughout my life. But yeah, they're all very different, and yeah. And the one thing I'm just going to also say, there was something later on I realized really recently as well, is that a long time ago, I met like Margaret Atwood, the author, and anyway, the one that did Handmaid's Tale, Handmaid's Tale. And Margaret Atwood, I met her in Toronto in 2006 or something, and it was like a huge gala event, and she was wearing a dress that was the front and the back of her book. And I realized later on that it was really probably like an influence on my work, this idea to wear your own work or to wear an advertisement of your own work. That was kind of interesting as well.
Oh, I love that. I love that she was wearing her own book as her outfit. So she's basically her book. I love that. It's a great story. Do you have? I would love to see photos of that, so maybe we can share them across social media if we find them, because it's a great reference point. And how do you see this digital language evolving? Because you were mentioning that this work and this interest is like, you were pointing at that time at 2014, 2016. How do you see it evolving? How is it transforming? How this digitalization is impacting also the language and the way you work with it today?
Yeah. I mean, I think like, we're going through obviously like new visual literacy as well, and how we work with images, but also how we work with words, and obviously the way we communicate online really had an impact, I think, on the way students perhaps, or even like, professors are talking about their own work as well. And I think like even looking at lexicon, like I'm really keen on having students develop a lexicon for their work as well, and words are very important when you actually talk about your work, and first of all, for instance, like you can look at different artists as well, right? So if you look at, for example, Richard Serra, a very kind of traditional artist, but this idea that he used terms like, to roll, to fold, to store, to bend, to twist, this to shave, to crumble. So this idea of using verbs and specific words that describe your work, I think that's very important. Thinking about the post-internet now, you can, if you look at if you think about Seth Price, for example, right? This idea of to digitize, to compress, to download, to blow up, to all these kind of to bookmark, to launch, to freeze, to embed. Like there's all these beautiful kind of words that we're using online that it's just, for me, I'm just like, how are we translating that, or into our work? How is this influencing the way we design now? So I think this whole language, after my research on post-internet, I was really interested in thinking about new forms of writing. Of course, as a professor in academia, we do a lot of more academic writing as well, but I really wanted to go away for this idea of maybe creative writing, or short form of writing, or this idea of having tweets, as a form of writing as well. These kind of micro poetry, became really interesting for me as well, and that's kind of what advertisement is as well. So that's why I became really interested in words. But yeah, so just to go back, for example, right now I'm teaching MFA students right now at Parsons, and it's very interesting because we started with that, the importance of lexicon and choosing words to describe. Because like when you do like a fashion presentation, often like students or in general, like designers use the same kind of words, or it became like really blended. So I think it's very important the way you pick your words. So yeah, and I'm really interested. I started like years ago a series of I call it active research exercises, because as a professor, I really like to do these kind of experimental activities with my students to really unleash like new ways of looking at research and design. And yeah, the same thing, the idea of acting or action verbs, you know, I mean, picking verbs and like, for example, to freeze and really unpack what that means, you know what I mean, culturally, historically, you know, politically as well, how we're translating that through physical form, digital form. And I think that is something that is very interesting to me as well, just to kind of like develop a design process based on lexicon. Yeah.
So if we're talking about teaching, what other things in terms of digital culture, apart from evolving language and importance of lexicon that you mentioned now, how the current digitalization, how do you see it entering into your teaching practice?
Yeah. Uh, it's, I mean, digital world is everywhere and every day and at all times. So it is not like a specific like method or tools or, you know, like software as well. And I think technology, like, you know, I always tell my students like these are just additional tools, the same as a sewing machine, you know what I mean? So just to think about, you can use obviously all these digital software as well, part of your process, you know, not only software, but I'm just thinking obviously with like AI and chat GPT, you know, and all of this as well, to make sure they understand this is not a tool that's going to make decision necessary for you as a designer. These are tools to help you think in new ways or approach your work in new ways, in a way, you know what I mean, or new thinking, or give you a new perspective, you know. And one thing as well with AI, you know, I talk a lot about the idea of stereotypes, you know, like there's a lot of parts of AI that it's still problematic as well, like to me, because it's like there's a lot of like stereotype in terms of the way you add language or the way you engage with the AI as well. And the idea of data, where's data is coming from, it's always like a challenge. So I talk a lot about that as well. This idea of, you know, like where archive, you know, what's the ownership, what's the provenance of these images as well, you know, because I've done some exercises with my students where you put, let's say, I don't know, like a specific culture, and it became like so stereotype and very kind of shocking and very problematic as well, the way AI was constructing, you know, I mean, a very stereotype or stereotypical identity. So I think there's still some work to do in that sense in terms of inclusion and like, you know, where's the data coming from with the AI. But yeah, I always say that it's like a tool, the same way as they're using like Cloud 3D for their pattern cutting or whatever like this, you know, it's a tool, you know what I mean? It's not the end of something, you know? And I think for them, it's important to also understand that.
I share with you this approach towards like collaborative and knowledge and creativity expanding practices. For now, I think this is great in that context. Yeah, and speaking of cultures, so first time I think I got access to Midjourney, I tried to make like a birthday invite. As I'm Polish, my friend was Polish, we're doing a birthday party together. When we typed in, you know, two Polish women celebrating birthday, and it gave us some very romanticized 19th century village style where two women were making butter in some kind of folk-ish Slavic outfit. So that was very far from our body representation, our culture, our fashion as being us. So definitely it's there's cultural stereotypical component is very, very big and very present. One thing that I also wanted to ask you about is your work in China, because I know that you spend there some time. So I'm also curious how this kind of understanding of globality and particular cultures, how is that important to your work?
Yeah. Oh, yes. Okay. I'm love China. I'm fascinated by China, but it's also, I think I started to go there, like I was saying earlier, I think in 2016. And for me, it was really interesting because at Parsons, we have a lot of Chinese students. And for me, it became really important as well to kind of understand, you know, the cultural background of my students. And I started to do, having a lot of travels, going to a lot of town. I was giving a lot of workshops, and lectures in a lot of different towns across China. So I got to know so many parts of China and culture. And it was really a beautiful way to me personally to kind of get to know a little bit like the background of my students and understand. And then also, not in addition to that as well, I started to go to Shanghai Fashion Week a lot because there were a lot of changes that were happening in the landscape there. It was really interesting for me to see a lot of graduates from LCF or Central St. Martin's or Parsons slowly going back to Shanghai and really changing completely the industry. So I started to go a lot, at Shanghai Fashion Week. So that was a really, really good moment for me and like connecting the industry with some graduates for us. So it was kind of a really nice mix. And then, of course, I started to learn Mandarin as well. I had to, obviously, because I was going there quite often. And it was really another way, again, for me to really expand on my research. So it was not like I was just there of course, I was a tourist or a visitor. But for me, it was really important to be able to communicate with people. So I started to learn Mandarin. I do speak a little bit of Mandarin as well, which is amazing because I'm like in the elevator at Parsons and they speak Chinese or Mandarin around me as well. And they have no idea understand a little bit, and it's like, it's been amazing.
It's a secret skill. Great for eavesdropping, I guess, at work, it seems. But also we're back at language. So maybe before we conclude, I wanted to also ask you again about words, but this time about the book that you're writing, editing. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I'm co-editing a book with Dirk Reiners, who used to be the head of AMFI, Amsterdam Fashion Institute, as well. So we worked quite a bit pre-pandemic and during the pandemic on developing this book. So there's going to be there are so many amazing authors as well from all around the world. And it's called Fashion Plus. It's inclusive articulations and practices in design, communication, and development. So for us, this book, it was really important to gather a lot of different voices and really challenge as well different writing formats. I was talking about that earlier as well, to the idea of branching out from only academic writing. So in the book, it's divided into 5 different kind of areas or themes. We're looking at fashion and activism. We're looking at fashion and social justice, fashion, digitalization, and technology. We're just looking at visual art as well and style, and also gender. And it's very interesting because you see, of course, we have some university professors, but we also have designers, photographers, and of all abilities as well, So that was really interesting. And the format, sometimes it's a conversation between 2 creatives. Sometimes it's more almost a manifesto. Sometimes it is an academic, more like a journal entry, if you wish, as well. And we also work with a very amazing graphic designer, and a graphic design team, because we wanted to make sure that the visual representation in the book and the font and the text was really, really kind of accessible as well. It was really important for us. And the idea that this book is not just for professors or academic, this book is very open to different audiences. And I think that was a really big goal of us. So it will come out very soon as well, I believe at the end of this fall semester. So at the end of fall 23. I'll let you know when it goes out as well. Yeah, very excited.
Yeah, we'll be looking out for it. And yeah, congrats. Sounds like an amazing project. Thank you so much, Marie, for being here with us today.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
If you like this podcast and you would like to see it to continue, as well as receive more information from Unfolding Strategies, please visit unfoldingstrategies.substack.com and subscribe, where you will get access to our recent insights, reading lists, and podcast episodes, as well as archive of past newsletters, talks, and episodes. Thank you for listening.